Iron Maiden, the heaviest and the original of heavy metal bands. So today we're doing something a bit different. We're going to drink this beer. It's a Trooper IPA. You can see there's Eddie on the front. And we're all going to be ranking all of the studio albums by Iron Maiden from last to first. Well, which is your favourite? Check out the video. Let's get ready to rock. Welcome back to Rocker's Beer Review. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We are ranking all of the Iron Maiden albums from the worst to the best over their entire studio album collection. And also, because obviously it's Iron Maiden, and I hope that there's a lot of Iron Maiden fans out there, we're going to be drinking this. Now I've just picked this up from Morrison's this week. I've not really seen this before, but it's a Trooper IPA. It's not the it's slightly different than the original Trooper, which wasn't an IPA, but this is a Trooper IPA. It's coming in a nice big 500ml bottle. It's 4.3%, so for an IPA that's quite low, but I expect it to be more of a traditional British IPA, just like Iron Maiden are a traditional British heavy metal band. So let's get this beer into the glass and see what it's like. So yeah, I mean, obviously straight away it's probably going to be more like a golden ale. It's probably going to be a little bit more bitter. I mean, beer in the glass there. We've got a little one finger head. It's a fairly amber, quite high levels of carbonation. Not the, even in the light there, it's not the lightest of beer. There's no haze in there. It's fairly sort of, you can see through it pretty much. I suppose there's a slight haze, but let's get some aroma, shall we? Yeah, there's definitely a floral and a sort of citrusy, sort of fruity smell. It's very sort of hoppy, This is, to me, the sort of craft beer. This is what I imagined it was like before I started drinking craft beer. That sort of very sort of flowery sort of taste. I'm going to get it down because I'm already getting thirsty. Yeah, I mean, this would not rate in the Iron Maiden between 80 and 90, not in the Iron Maiden scale, on the Rocker's Beer Review scale. It tastes like it's an ale, basically. It's an ale with a lot of floral, flowery, sort of hoppy notes. It's very thin, in fact. There's no body on it at all. And as you can see there, the head is almost disappearing. There's a lot of carbonation there, but it just sort of flies away and doesn't sort of sit on the head. There's no decent head to speak of. It's a bit disappointing, The artwork is great because obviously it's got Eddie on it, but apart from that, it's going to help me keep hydrated as I go through this list. So, Iron Maiden, they've done loads of albums, sold 80 million of them. Loads of live albums. I'm not including any live albums here. But I'm going to go through the albums from all the studio albums, both with all three singers in them. And we'll see what we have. So, in last place, it's Virtual 11. That was the album that came out in 98. It was the second album with Blaze Bayley, who replaced Bruce Dickinson. And to be honest, I think they realised then the writing was on the wall there that, it was not the same without Bruce Dickinson. Blaze, I'm a big fan of his, his previous band Wolfsbane, but I just don't think he fit into Iron Maiden, and I don't think he had the chops, as it were, the sort of vocal ability compared with Bruce Dickinson. There's a couple of good songs on there, Clansman, Future Real, they're not too bad, but that's for me is the poorest album. Then after that was the first with Blaze Bayley, The X Factor. This came out in 95. Bruce had left. Again, Sign of the Cross, Man on the Edge, they're good tracks, but it's just not quite Maiden. It was in that sort of 90s period that wasn't doing that well. Next would be The Final Frontier. Now this isn't a bad, it's certainly more progressive, it's a bit space themed, but there's no real classics on there, and obviously Bruce is back in the band at this point, but it almost is a sort of Iron Maiden by numbers band. Next, The Matter of Life and Death. This was a really long sort of experimental. All the songs were quite long, quite progressive, which usually I would like, but it's difficult to sort of see where the real good tracks are. So that's why it doesn't feature as high. Then we've got Dance of Death, which is another sort of similar track. I mean, we've got Nico McBrain writes his first song on this album, and Passchendaele is a really great classic track. But apart from that, a little hit and miss. Then we've got No Prayer for the Dying. Now this was the first time I saw Iron Maiden, was on the No Prayer for the Dying tour. But the whole album just doesn't sound very, after the Seventh Son, it just sounded really flat and a bit raw. And Bruce, his voice wasn't quite the same. And I don't think there's some really. I don't think it's got the really great tracks on it. I mean, Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter is probably the best track on there. Then the last album with Bruce Dickinson in his first iteration of the band was which is Fear of the Dark. Again, it's a bit overly long and there's no real classic tracks on there. I mean, the title track Fear of the Dark is brilliant, but there's just not enough to it. And I think at this point, they needed to do something, and Bruce was probably getting a bit tired and everything of the band. Then we've got Book of Souls. Now, this came out fairly recently. Well, I mean, it's 2015. And I think the songs are really good. I saw them on this tour, and I thought that Bruce's voice was absolutely amazing. It was probably better then than it was when I saw him in the early 1990. Really good. There's some really great tracks on there. And I think it deserves, it deserves a place in your classic Iron Maiden sort of tracks. Okay. Then we've got we're going down now. We're nearly halfway through Brave New World. I think this is a great album, and I've re-listened to this recently, and I think there's some really good songs on it. This was obviously the first band as a six-piece, so when Adrian Smith and Bruce Dickinson came back to the band, the first 3 or 4 tracks are absolutely superb, and it sounds great, and there's some good. And the tracks on it are up to that level now with the songwriting. Everyone's getting involved in the songwriting. I really do feel that Adrian Smith was as much of a loss to Iron Maiden as Bruce Dickinson was. Then we're going into the real sort of classic stuff. So then we've got the album Iron Maiden, the original, their debut album. Some great songs on it, and there's some really good songs on it live. Songs like Iron Maiden, Phantom of the Opera, Remember Tomorrow. Some really, really good tracks on it. Running Free. I mean, there's lots of good tracks on it. It's a little bit, the productions are very, very raw. I mean, this came out in the 70s. It's not quite as good to listen to today. It doesn't stand up in modern standards, really. And, of course, no Adrian Smith. Then we've got Killers. So Killers, I think, is a really underrated album. Again, production got better, but it's still not up there with the sort of 80s albums. Killers, the song is absolutely superb, one of my favourite tracks. And obviously at this point we had Adrian Smith, and it was the sort of definitive lineup of the band, really. Then I think Peace of Mind. I mean, The Trooper, Flight of Icarus, absolutely superb songs. This was the first with Nico McBrain coming in on drums. And in those sort of 80s, it's probably that sort of the later sort of side of things. There are a few sort of dodgy tracks on it, certainly near the end. Then we've got Power Slave. I mean, some people, we're in the top 1, 2, 3. We're in the 4th. This is the 4th best Iron Maiden album, Power Slave. I mean, I must admit that if I was going to put a live album in, then the live album that came after Power Slave on that tour, Live After Death, would probably be the best Maiden album. But I think it's a bit cheating because it's got a lot of the best of stuff on there prior to that. But Power Slave, I mean, Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight, absolute classic tracks. You want to hear them when you see them live. And I think the song Power Slave's great, but the song Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is probably their best in terms of their sort of long epic songs. Okay, top 3. In 3rd place, bronze position, is, and this could become controversial, Number of the Beast. So in 3rd place, Number of the Beast. I mean, what can you say about Number of the Beast? Number of the Beast, Run to the Hills, superb songs. And Hallowed Be Their Name is probably my favourite Maiden song. But again, you've got Invaders, it's not the best. I don't really like Prisoner. Children of the Damned, yeah, again, not so great. But it was an album where, obviously, Bruce Dickinson's first album with the band, and it really set them off, and it sort of, you know, it made Maiden really. It was a massive, big hit. And in second place, now again, this could be controversial, but in second place, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, a fairly modern. It was come in at the, you know, in 1988. But for me, it's all killer and no filler. Every song on it's great. It's got a great sound, great concept album. It's probably a little short, if anything, but apart from that, it's a superb album. I love all the songs: Moonchild, Infinite Dreams, Evil Be Thy Name, Can I Play With Madness, Seventh Son, Prophecy, The Clairvoyant, Only the Good Die Young. All of those songs are really great, so it's second place. And in first place, and this is where I think there'll be a lot of people going, Rocker, you're out of your mind. But in first place, Somewhere in Time. It's got the best cover, let's face it. But I really like this album. I think just because it develops the Maiden sound, but it gives so much different. Adrian Smith's songs on there like Sea of Madness and Heaven Can Wait. Oh, I've got the name of the song now. Wasted Years and Stranger in a Strange Land. I think they're superb songs, you know, whether by Maiden or anyone else. Really, really good. It's probably only let down by probably Alexander the Great, but apart from that, I think it's a really solid album, and it deserves the #1 space in Rocker's top Iron Maiden albums. So there's my top albums. There's my Iron Maiden's albums ranked from last to first. What do you think? Why don't you let me know in the comments which is the best Maiden album? I'm sure there'll be a lot of people saying different things. You know, is it Power Slave? Is it The Number of the Beast? Is it Seventh Son? I know that there won't be many people that think Somewhere in Time's the best album, but I'm interested to know what you think. And also, what about the Blaze Bayley ones? They came, you know, they were last and second, but last in the list. But, you know, are they worth more of a listen? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. This was the Trooper IPA. Wasn't great. I would rank that probably. I'd probably rank it just after the Blaze Bayley albums. But it's got Eddie on the front, and that's going to get people buying it. So until the next video, cheers everyone, and keep on rocking.